Welcome dear students to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. K.S. Nagaraja of Deccan College, Pune. I am teaching the course Historical Linguistics. In this first module, we will introduce the subject and discuss its nature and scope. The title of the module is Historical Linguistics, Nature and Scope. As we know that historical linguistics is a branch of linguistics. Linguistics is the study of language scientifically, we say. The two basic branches of linguistics are descriptive linguistics and historical linguistics. Descriptive linguistics naturally concentrates on the language of a particular time and tries to understand the structure and tries to provide theory and all those things. Whereas historical means looking from a time perspective, how languages change in time and what are the issues involved in that, and is there any possibility of comparing two languages or two stages of a language. All these issues will be taken up in this particular module, and also many of the things introduced in this will be continued in the later modules as well. Linguistics is the science of language. It attempts to gather data from a language concerning a range of phenomena to observe the patterns which underlie those phenomena and to express the observed regularities by means of formal rules. Like other scientific areas, linguistics also can be divided into various subfields. The most abstract of these is theoretical linguistics, which borders on the area of applied mathematics and applied logic. Like other scientific areas, linguistics also can be divided into several subfields. The most abstract of these is called theoretical linguistics, which borders on the areas of applied mathematics and which borders on the areas of and applied logic. The theoretical linguist formulates and studies the abstract models and conventions used to express the regularities observed in human language. He is also interested in those elements or rules which are common to all languages and which are known as linguistic universals. The second large division of linguistics is descriptive linguistics. It will thus be seen that it is not simply the greater or lesser extension in time of the data being investigated which contributes to the fundamental differences between synchronic and diachronic analysis. Rather, it is the linguist's attitude towards the time dimension itself. Structural linguistics is not synonymous with descriptive linguistics. Structural is a point of view. It means a treatment in terms of the whole system, and its opposite is one which is atomistic, piecemeal treatment of parts without regard to the whole. Descriptive linguistics seeks to investigate and analyze a language as it exists at a given point of time and totally disregards time as a relevant factor in its investigations and attributes to the data a uniform status of simultaneity, and its concern is therefore language in synchronic aspect. As opposed to this is the study of language at different points on the time dimension called diachronic, that means through time investigation. Diachronic linguistics, that means dia means two, so through time perspective, two time aspects, is the antonym of synchronic. The term synchronic with time is a generally synonym of descriptive, although it includes in addition what might be called diatopic aspects such as dialectology, sociolinguistics, and the like. Most synchronic descriptions are of contemporary language states, but their importance as a preliminary to diachronic study has been stressed since Ferdinand de Saussure, who taught in Geneva. Linguistic investigations, unless specified to the contrary, are assumed to be synchronic. One can carry out synchronic analysis of dead languages also, provided there is sufficient evidence preserved in the written records that have come down to us. The description of a dead language will necessarily be less complete than the description of a modern spoken language, simply because it is impossible to check the validity of certain statements made about the language by appealing to native speakers as a source of further evidence. The speech of a given generation is never quite identical to that of the parents or to that of the children. Of course, the differences between adjoining generations are slight and for the most part will go unnoticed. However, given a time span of centuries or millennia, minute differences will have a cumulative effect, and often a given language will acquire a very new form. Its resemblance to the earlier stage will be, however, evident only after investigation. Language changes in time. The changes that languages undergo in the course of time are the data for historical linguistics. The historical linguist views human language as a dynamic, ever-changing phenomenon, stable insofar as it allows communication between speakers at a given or nearby point of time. It is even changing as it reflects changing speech habits, is subject to internal and external factors, and adapts to new situations of the speech community. Historical linguistics seeks to investigate and describe the way in which languages change or maintain their structures during the course of time. Its domain, therefore, is language in its diachronic aspects. In its most elementary work, the historical linguist takes two stages of a given language, both of which presumably have been studied by means of grammatical analysis. Then he tries to express in some formal way the changes that the language has undergone in passing from one stage to the other, older stage to the newer stage. Each stage of the language is described by a grammar as being some relatively coherent system of elements. There are also rules for combining these elements to form sentences. In the shift from older to newer stage, some of these elements are dropped and new ones appear. Some rules are deleted while others are added, and elements and rules can also undergo various modifications. In other words, a historical linguist shows how one grammar develops into another over a period of time. Historical linguistics is concerned with the processes of language change through time. It investigates how and why the language of individuals, a social group, or a whole speech community develops in respect of its pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. It is possible to abstract the grammatical structure of the language of each period from the documents, and in this way a series of synchronic grammars may be set up and compared. The differences in their successive structures may then be interpreted as reflecting the historical development of the language. In this sense, diachronic linguistics may be said to be secondary to synchronic linguistics, since the historical linguist deduces the changes that a language has undergone from the comparison of synchronic grammars. Diachronic is very much a synonym of historical, referring to the study of language as it persists through time. Diachronic linguistics has two aspects: the process of development of speech habits in a single person from birth to death is called linguistic ontogeny, the study of which is one aspect of diachronic linguistics, and the study of histories of language as wholes through successive decades and centuries is linguistic phylogeny. For the study of the latter, the term historical linguistics is customarily used. Historical linguistics treats linear relationships, and comparative linguistics treats collateral relationships. Historical linguistics treats changes of various kinds. Comparative linguistics sees through change as best as it can and establishes earlier stages when much of the change had not yet taken place. In short, historical linguistics takes us downstream on the time axis, while comparative linguistics upstream. At the basis of historical linguistics lies the fact that, shown by empirical evidences, that language change does not take place in a totally haphazard fashion. Rather, language changes occur in patterns which can be expressed in terms of a formal notation. The foundation of all modern linguistics, the fact that human language is amenable to scientific analysis, was first shown and accepted on the basis of data drawn from observations of language change. The historical linguist often studies changes revealed in the comparison of related languages, which is called comparative linguistics. The languages can be considered to be related to one another if they descend from, or that means or derived from, a single original language, a common ancestor. So comparative linguistics has two tasks. One, establishing the fact and degree of relationship between two or more languages, and two, reconstructing earlier, that is prehistoric stages called proto-languages. Whether or not all languages change in the same way, some of the same tendencies and processes have been observed in widely separated and structurally different languages. It appears that at some point the history of each language must have treated separately and described according to its own development. We often have a situation when a single parent language will appear in several different forms, that is daughter languages, in a later stage. Latin, for instance, the ancestor of Romance languages, is the ancestor of French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Portuguese languages. Similarly, Sanskrit is the ancestor of modern Indic languages like Hindi, Marathi, Bengali, Punjabi, Sindhi, Gujarati, Simhalese, Odia, Assamese, Nepali, and such languages. In these cases, through comparative method, it is possible to reconstruct the proto-forms and also compare them with the available ancient language, which facilitates validation of the method. However, it may be noted that many obviously related languages but do not have a recorded ancestor. For example, for Germanic languages such as English, Dutch, Danish, Gothic, Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, we do not possess an ancestor that is extent. And similarly, for languages like Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, Telugu and many others, the common or Proto-Dravidian is not available. And similarly, common forms of Austroasiatic languages like Santali, Mon, Khmer, Vietnamese is not extant either. By comparing the languages which are attested, the historical linguist tries to determine which elements are common to all of them. He then adds to this his knowledge of the general principles of language change and seeks as far as possible to describe the structure of the common language. He is then able to discuss the different changes in the attested languages by tracing their development from his sketch of the common language. The process of discovering and describing the elements and rules of the common language is known as reconstruction. And the method by which this is done in most cases is called the comparative method, since it involves comparing different language systems. In fact, more will be discussed in this area in the module number 7. In the past, it was thought that the principal domain of historical linguistics was the study of how languages change, believing that answers to question of why they change were too inaccessible. However, since the 1960s or so, great strides have been achieved also in understanding why languages change. Today, we can say that historical linguistics is dedicated to the study of how as well as why languages change. It is dedicated both to the methods of investigating linguistic change and to the theories designed to explain these changes. Some people imagine that historical linguists mostly just study the history of individual words and that they are fascinated by word histories called etymology, derived from the Greek word etymon, true, that is the neuter form of it, that is true or the original meaning of a word, but this is far from true. The primary goal of historical linguistics is not etymologies but accurate etymology in an important product of historical linguistic work. For instance, the word glamour, interestingly, it is a changed form of the word grammar, which was originally in use in Scots English. It meant magic, enchantment, spell, etc. On the other hand, grammar has its own interesting history. It was borrowed from Old French grammare, which itself was from Latin grammatica, ultimately derived from Greek gramma, letter, written, mark. What is of greater concern to historical linguists is not the etymology of these words per se, but the kinds of changes they have undergone and the techniques or methods we have at our disposal to recover this history. Thus, in the history of the words glamour and grammar, we notice various kinds of changes, borrowing from Greek to Latin and ultimately from French, a descendant of Latin, to English, shifts in meaning of the two words and the sporadic change in the sound ra to la in the derived word glamour. Changes of this sort are what historical linguistics is about, not just the individual word histories. These kinds of changes that languages can and do undergo and the techniques that have been developed in historical linguistics to recover them are of great importance and of real concern to historical linguistics. Synchrony is one of the two main temporal dimensions of linguistic investigation introduced by the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, the other being diachronic. In synchronic linguistics, languages are studied at a theoretical point of time. One describes a state of a language disregarding whatever changes might have taken place. For example, one could carry out a synchronic description of the 16th century or of modern day languages. Synchronic description of a language is thus non-historical. It presents an account of the language as it is at some particular point of time. Diachronic description of a language traces the historical development of the language and records the changes that have taken place in it between successive points in time. For example, the changes which have taken place between Vedic and classical Sanskrit could be described in phonological, grammatical, and semantic terms. The later modules will discuss this. All languages are constantly changing, but each of the successive states of a language can and should be studied on its own terms without reference to what it has developed from or what it is likely to develop into. Many kinds of linguistic changes are possible, as any aspect of language can change: sound changes, grammatical changes, semantic changes, and analogical changes, etc., which will be studied in the other modules. However, some instances of linguistic changes may be provided here. Comparable texts of two or more stages of languages have been provided below. The first contains a passage from English belonging to 3 stages, and the second contains a stanza both in Avestan and Vedic Sanskrit. Following is a passage taken from Bible belonging to 3 periods of time for comparison. The students can read this and can see how languages change in the 3 stages. Stage 1, Old English, 10th century. Stage 2, Early New English, 1526. Stage 3, New English, 1870. From the passage, one can observe various changes as below. The sound changes and some of the grammatical changes have been provided here. Similarly, the closeness between Avesta and Old Sanskrit is remarkable. That can be shown by taking a stanza of Avesta and comparable texts in the Vedic Sanskrit, which are extremely close. From the above various sound changes, can be easily observed that, like frictivization, loss of aspiration in Avestan, and beside other changes, one can observe diphthongs changing to monophthongs in Sanskrit. So the postulation of changes occurring in language is based on any of the following 3 factors: study of the various synchronic aspects of a language, comparison of 2 different languages that are considered to be genetically related, third, comparison of 2 different stages of a single language. Actually, the study of language change starts with sound change, as it is easily observable and identifiable. So we may summarize this module in this way, that historical linguistics is one of the primary branch of linguistics, and it is most useful in not only in identifying the changes between two stages of a language or two or more languages, but also it is helpful in reconstructing the past stages of the languages, what we may call proto-languages. In fact, that part is known as comparative reconstruction, and in fact that module will be discussed at a later time. So this particular course, in fact this particular module just introduces the students to the fact that languages change in due course of time, which may not be observable in one's own lifetime, but when generations are put together, one can perceive these things only through records, if records are available. So more will be discussed in the coming modules.